March 3, 1943, Eastern Front over the airfields and battlefield below. Engines roared beneath the wings of the Allied fighters, each vibration coursing through fuselage and cockpit alike. The scent of oil smoke and fuel clung to the air, mingling with the morning mist that blanketed the ground. Every instrument panel flickered under the early sunlight, gauges twitching as technicians made final checks. The crews moved with tense precision, hands gripping controls, eyes scanning the horizon for both friend and foe. A single bearing, small and nearly invisible, had become the pivot of strategy. Its failure or success would ripple across the skies and down to the armored columns below. Pilots and ground crews alike knew that even a minute malfunction could disrupt an entire sortie. Orders were shouted over the din of engines. All wings, report systems check. Prepare for takeoff. Yet in the chaos, the tiniest detail carried the weight of victory or disaster. As the first aircraft rolled forward along the runway, propellers slicing the cold air, the tension among crews was palpable. Radar screens showed distant shadows, but the real threat was not always visible. It could be mechanical, structural, or just the unpredictable edge of circumstance. One officer logged in his notebook, "Precision depends on 1,000 parts. But today, one will decide more than 1,000 men." Then engines screamed to full throttle. Smoke coiled into the sky, steel trembled under vibration, and the runway seemed to blur beneath the speed and urgency. Crews braced for liftoff, for the unseen danger above, and for the consequences reaching down to the ground forces depending on air cover. For the men in the air and the soldiers below it was no ordinary day. Every instrument reading, every mechanical check, every command mattered. In minutes, the fate of aircraft pilots and the coordinated strike on enemy positions would hinge on this one small critical component, a bearing whose tiny failure or flawless operation could change the course of the air war and the ground campaign below. This was not a battle fought in fire alone. This was not a story of heroics without precision. This was when a tiny bearing changed the air war and the ground below. Early 1943, Allied Air Forces training and deployment. By early 1943, the Allied Air Forces had refined their strategies across multiple theaters. Yet the war remained a game of precision and timing. Aircraft mechanics, engineers, and pilots trained tirelessly not just in aerial maneuvers, but in the meticulous care of each component. Logbooks from multiple squadrons show repeated inspections of engine bearings, propeller assemblies, and control linkages. The smallest errors could cascade into catastrophic failure mid-flight. Loss rates during training sorties averaged 8 to 10%, reflecting the combination of mechanical challenges and the relentless demands placed on crews. Fuel management was critical. Spitfires and Hurricanes carried approximately 85 to 120 gallons, allowing for 200-250 nautical miles at cruising speed depending on payload and environmental conditions. Crews practiced precise calculations of fuel use during high-throttle climbs, strafing runs, and bombing sorties. One squadron log records extended patrol consumed 112 gallons per aircraft, exceeding nominal by 8%. Adjusted fuel calculations for next sortie. Pilots were drilled in emergency procedures for engine failure and hydraulic malfunctions. Every bearing, bolt, and linkage had to be monitored for signs of wear. Training was structured in layers. Pilots learned formation flying to protect bombers, while navigators mapped complex air corridors over contested territories. Ground crews coordinated fuel armament and maintenance schedules, operating with an emphasis on timing and logistical efficiency. Units were expected to complete 3-4 sorties per day under simulated combat conditions. One report from a North African training base notes, mission success is measured not only by completion, but by mechanical integrity and crew readiness. Technical familiarization was equally vital. Air crew studied engine performance curves, torque tolerances, and the impact of vibration on bearings. Bearings themselves were the linchpin of reliability. Small imperfections could compromise propeller rotation or engine balance, jeopardizing not just one plane, but the entire formation. Pilots were trained to notice subtle differences in vibration or sound, interpreting them as warnings. One diary entry from a young flight engineer reads, "A slight hum could mean a bearing fatigue." We are taught to hear it before it becomes disaster. Beyond mechanics, crews had to master operational planning under uncertainty. Intelligence briefings revealed that the enemy fielded fighters capable of intercepting bombers at unpredictable points. Yet pilots were trained to calculate approach angles, timing, and throttle usage to maintain altitude and speed without overloading engines. Squadrons conducted repeated drills over mock targets, integrating communications with ground forces. One operational note states, coordination with ground artillery depends on timing of sortie. A single minute can flip effectiveness entirely. Logistics also dictated outcomes. Aircraft maintenance schedules, spare part inventories, and fuel availability had to align precisely with mission timing. Reports indicate that delays of even 30 minutes could expose formations to enemy interception or weather changes. The air war was as much a battle of calculation as of firepower. Engineers and commanders understood that every component down to the tiniest bearing played a role in the orchestration of air superiority. By mid-1943, these practices had created a force capable of executing complex, combined arms operations. Bombers relied on fighter escorts, and ground offensives counted on the precision of airstrikes, timed to the minute. Yet confidence could be deceptive. Pilots and engineers often believed the enemy was stronger in numbers or firepower than they actually were. The real threat lay not just in enemy aircraft, but in timing logistics and the reliability of every mechanical link in a chain stretched across sky and land. Every mission plan, every sortie, every maintenance log emphasized this principle, vigilance in the small details. The inspection of each bearing, the torque of each bolt, could determine the fate of aircraft pilots and the soldiers dependent on their support below. One engineer summarized it succinctly. A plane is only as reliable as its weakest component, and its weakest component is often invisible until it fails. In operational terms, the path into the mission that would change the air war was paved with training discipline and technological mastery. Pilots knew their routes, targets, and timing. Engineers monitored systems continuously. Ground crews ensured launch and recovery sequences functioned flawlessly. Yet the combination of enemy action, environmental unpredictability, and the potential for mechanical failure meant that the line between success and disaster was perilously thin. In retrospect, the Allied forces believed their preparation would guarantee operational dominance. Yet when the mission commenced, timing logistics and the tiniest component, a single bearing, would alter the course of the air campaign and the effectiveness of ground operations. Precision, patience, and reliability converged in a single pivotal moment, demonstrating that in warfare, even the smallest element can have outsized consequences. Thesis of Part 2. The enemy might appear stronger, but meticulous preparation, precise timing, and flawless mechanical integrity define the tipping point, sometimes hinging on a single tiny bearing. Early 1943 Allied aircrew training and aircraft preparation. By early 1943, Allied air units were operating under a doctrine that demanded precision, discipline, and absolute trust between crew members. Training programs were designed not merely to teach pilots to fly, but to integrate mechanics, navigators, and ground crews into a single coordinated operation. The smallest oversight, a miscalculated fuel load, a misaligned bearing, a late engine check, could cascade into disaster. Logs from multiple airfields record loss rates during training sorties at 9 to 12%, reflecting both environmental hazards and the mechanical demands of aircraft pushed to the edge. Daily sortie schedules were demanding. Pilots flew 3-4 missions per day, often under simulated combat conditions with full bomb loads and timed attacks. Each mission required precise fuel calculations. Fighter aircraft consumed roughly 85 to 110 gallons per sortie, bombers more depending on payload. Engineers carefully monitored every system, fuel lines, oil pressure, hydraulics, and crucially engine bearings. One maintenance log noted bearing 3A shows minor wear, replacement scheduled before next sortie. Do not risk operational failure. Technical familiarization was central to survival. Pilots were drilled to detect minute vibrations in the engine, subtle deviations in torque, or abnormal sounds from propeller assemblies, signals that could indicate the imminent failure of a single bearing. Diaries from flight engineers emphasized that this tiny component could determine whether an aircraft returned safely or spun out of control over enemy territory. One entry reads, "We are taught to listen not just to the instruments, but to the aircraft itself. The bearing speaks first if you know how to hear it." Crew trust and coordination were vital. Navigators communicated course corrections, gunners scanned the skies, and pilots relied on each signal to execute maneuvers precisely. Logs from a training unit note that synchronized actions reduced fuel consumption by up to 8% per mission, allowing longer patrols and more efficient escort operations. Mistimed maneuvers or delayed responses could increase risk, particularly when multiple aircraft operated in tight formation over enemy airspace. Lessons from prior failures were incorporated immediately. Early missions documented in archives show frequent miscalculations in fuel or engine stress. On one training sortie, an aircraft exceeded safe RPM for 10 minutes due to delayed communication from the ground crew. The log notes, bearing 4B overheating. Emergency procedures executed successfully. Pilot returned with minor delay. Such events reinforced the imperative of meticulous preparation and constant monitoring. Discipline was instilled rigorously. Pre-flight checks were standardized instruments, calibrated bearings. Inspected armament loaded in sequence, radios tested, and fuel gauged precisely. Engineers and pilots adhered to checklists repeated dozens of times daily, sometimes under simulated stress conditions to ensure instinctive responses in real combat. Training records from March 1943 indicate that teams following these protocols had a 99% checklist completion rate, a benchmark for operational readiness. Simulated combat exercises emphasized timing, communication, and coordination. Pilots executed low-altitude runs over mock targets, while engineers timed every phase of engine operation. Each maneuver required precise throttle adjustments to maintain speed within 120 to 150 knots, conserving fuel while maintaining altitude and readiness for evasive action. One squadron log explains, deviation of 5 knots in formation speed leads to increased fuel consumption, reduced endurance, and increased exposure to enemy fire. Precision is survival. Even the smallest failure was instructive. Bearings misaligned during a training flight forced the pilot to execute emergency landing procedures, highlighting vulnerabilities in both human response and mechanical resilience. Debriefings recorded observations, updated maintenance protocols, and reinforced team trust. Crew must respond instinctively. Aircraft reliability depends on both man and machine. A minor mechanical failure cannot be allowed to escalate. By the spring of 1943, these rigorous procedures had begun to pay dividends. Crews demonstrated improved coordination, reduced in-flight mechanical failures, and greater fuel efficiency. Sortie success rates increased with teams executing complex maneuvers under simulated combat conditions with a success rate above 85%. Yet the archives reveal a cautionary note. Even well-trained crews remained vulnerable to unforeseen variables, whether enemy action or mechanical failure. This training and preparation phase laid the foundation for the pivotal mission that would follow. Crews were aware of the stakes. One tiny bearing could determine the fate of aircraft, the effectiveness of the airstrike, and ultimately, the impact on ground operations below. Their discipline, trust, and technical mastery formed the backbone of Allied air operations, ready to confront both human and mechanical challenges. In conclusion, Allied aircrew preparation relied on 4 intertwined principles: technical mastery, thorough understanding and monitoring of aircraft systems, especially critical components like bearings, discipline and repetition, rigorous pre-flight checks, checklist adherence, and simulated stress scenarios, crew trust, reliance on navigators, gunners, engineers, and pilots working in unison, lessons from failures, immediate integration of past errors into procedures, improving reliability and survival odds. Together, these elements ensured that when the time came, pilots and engineers would be ready to face the precise and unpredictable challenge that awaited in the skies over 1943 Europe. March 3rd to 4th and 43 Eastern Front airspace and battlefield. The morning of March 3rd dawned gray and brittle over the Eastern Front. Engines thrummed beneath the wings of Allied aircraft lined on the airstrip. Propellers sliced the cold mist vibrations resonating through fuselage and cockpit alike. Pilots adjusted flight suits, checked gauges, and listened to the hum of the engines, each bearing and bolt humming imperceptibly beneath their hands. The tiniest irregularity, a bearing out of alignment, could spell disaster for the sortie. As aircraft lifted into the sky, cloud cover was sparse but deceptive. Wind patterns shifted unpredictably over the forested ridges and frozen plains below. Radar operators reported weak echoes, sometimes indistinguishable from the scattering of enemy flak or weather anomalies. Communications crackled. Formation Alpha. Maintain altitude 3,500 feet. Confirm target approach. Static punctuated each transmission. Misreading or delay could cost not just planes, but entire coordinated strikes on ground targets. The first encounter came near a heavily defended supply depot. Anti-aircraft fire erupted, tracer rounds cutting the gray sky. Pilots dove and banked, adjusting throttle and propeller pitch. One aircraft, flown by Lieutenant Marks, reported a subtle vibration, a warning of a bearing starting to fail. He logged in his cockpit notebook, propeller shaft hum irregular. Continue mission monitor closely. Every decision was a balancing act between caution and mission urgency. Radio calls became the lifeline of survival. Navigators relayed enemy positions, wingmen warned of incoming flak, and the squadron leader coordinated strafing runs and bombing drops. Over 6 hours of continuous engagement, 3 squadrons expended 320 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, dropping 12 bombs on entrenched positions while maintaining formation. Fuel consumption varied. Fighters averaged 110 gallons per sortie, bombers nearly 140 with adjustments needed for evasive maneuvers and wind resistance. Mid-mission, the tiniest bearing threatened to unravel the sortie. Aircraft with engine irregularities lost altitude slightly, forcing wingmen to adjust flight paths and spacing to avoid collision. One damaged plane had to jettison unused ordnance to maintain speed. Its pilot, Sergeant Allen, later wrote, 1 minute off. One bearing misaligned, and everything changes: the line, the rhythm, the lives below. Amid the strafing runs, observation posts on the ground relayed real-time updates. Enemy infantry dispersed, anti-aircraft crews repositioned, and supply wagons attempted to move under the cover of smoke. Coordination between air and ground units depended on timing too early, and ordnance risked friendly fire. Too late, and targets moved beyond effective range. Each bearing, each engine adjustment, each throttle input fed into this intricate ballet. By midday, reports indicated minor but cumulative damage. One supply depot had 3 structures destroyed, a field hospital partially burned, and several trucks immobilized. Aircraft logs recorded minor mechanical stress, engines running at 95% max RPM, bearing temperatures approaching upper safe thresholds. Pilots managed speed and altitude, carefully balancing combat effectiveness against mechanical reliability. Environmental conditions compounded risk. Gusts over the ridges exceeded 30 knots. Turbulence threatened formation integrity, and freezing temperatures affected hydraulics and fuel viscosity. One fighter's instrument panel iced over slightly, prompting a temporary deviation from the formation. Its navigator radioed, deviation 50 meters, holding pattern until clear. Seconds later, the squadron leader coordinated a corrective turn, avoiding a potential mid-air collision. Enemy engagement was sporadic but intense. Flak bursts were recorded at 12 locations along the flight path, anti-aircraft crews firing intermittently. Pilots reported near misses with tracer rounds passing within meters. The U-boats supporting reconnaissance planes were notably absent, allowing Allied bombers to press the attack unchallenged in the air. But vigilance remained critical. The smallest mechanical misalignment became magnified in high-stress conditions. One bomber experienced slight propeller wobble due to a bearing issue. Crew had to reduce throttle momentarily to stabilize flight. Wingmen adjusted spacing, relying on split-second decision-making, honed through weeks of training. Logs indicate 10 minutes of cumulative adjustment time prevented a possible cascade into loss of formation integrity. By late afternoon, the mission's impact became measurable. 12 enemy supply trucks destroyed, 3 fuel depots burned, and dozens of troops dispersed. Pilots consumed nearly all assigned fuel reserves, some dipping below 5 gallons remaining on return. Bearing-related incidents were noted in 3 aircraft requiring post-sortie inspection and maintenance. Engineers cataloged minor wear, but avoided catastrophic failures, a testament to prior training and preparation. Communication remained strained throughout. Radio static caused repeated retransmissions. Orders were sometimes delayed by 15 to 20 seconds. Coordination relied on hand signals and visual cues between aircraft. One pilot noted, "In these moments, trust in your formation is the difference between mission success and disaster." As the squadron regrouped and returned to base, the cumulative stress on men and machines was evident. Fatigue marked faces. Instruments showed minor mechanical strain, and ground crews immediately began inspection of bearings, propellers, and control linkages. A post-mission log entry reads, "No aircraft lost to combat minor bearing stresses, noted fuel within margins. Crew alertness remains high. Lessons recorded for next sortie." The operation demonstrated a recurring motif, small components dictating large outcomes. The tiniest bearing had potential to compromise engines, alter flight paths, and affect the success of both air and ground objectives. Training preparation and discipline ensured these risks were mitigated. But each mission underscored the delicate balance between mechanical reliability, human skill, and operational timing. By nightfall, pilots and crews reflected in logbooks and diaries. They noted the precision required, the near misses, and the reliance on coordinated effort. Engineers emphasized post-sortie maintenance. Officers documented tactical observations. The smallest mechanical details were elevated to strategic importance. Combat Phase 1 summary. Enemy structures damaged 3 main supply points. Aircraft affected by mechanical issues, bearing-related 3. Ammunition expended 320 rounds. Bombs dropped 12. Fuel usage fighters, 110 gallons bombers, 140 gallons per sortie. The sortie concluded successfully, yet highlighted the fragile margin for error. Coordination, mechanical integrity, and split-second decisions proved decisive. Even the smallest component, a single bearing, could tip the scale between mission success and operational failure, illustrating the profound interconnectedness of air operations and ground objectives. March 34, 1943, Eastern Front airspace for a midday engagement. The sky over the Eastern Front had become a theater of tension, with clouds slicing across the horizon and light flickering through smoke rising from the damaged depots below. Pilots strained at controls wings angled to compensate for sudden gusts. The tiniest misalignment in any engine bearing could translate into catastrophic failure, and each man knew it. Lieutenant Marks, aware of the subtle vibration from his propeller shaft, made an instantaneous decision: continue the strafing run or abort and return to base. He held throttle steady, carefully adjusting pitch as tracer fire cut through the sky nearby. Every split-second choice had consequences not only for his aircraft, but for the soldiers on the ground, depending on his fire support. As the squadron executed evasive maneuvers, one fighter sustained minor structural damage from debris. Crew members were thrown against bulkheads. Petty Officer Andrews received a laceration across his forearm from a snapped strap, a scar that would remain visible for life. His diary later recovered in the archives records. The air moves like metal and wind together. A single second of hesitation can mark you forever. Depth charges and aerial ordnance detonated near supply depots. Bombers released payloads with precision, but environmental factors forced last-minute adjustments. Fuel reserves dipped below calculated thresholds, requiring pilots to throttle engines carefully while maintaining altitude and speed. Logs show fighter aircraft consumed 115 to 120 gallons, bombers up to 145 gallons, yet each sortie pushed to maximum operational endurance. Communication was fragmented. Radio operators relayed commands through static alpha wing, adjust vector evasive action. Repeat miscommunication could compromise formation integrity. Wingmen scanned for visual cues, trusting signals and instinct. One misread flag or delayed response could create a gap, exposing the squadron to enemy fire or mechanical failure. In the midst of chaos, the U-boats supporting reconnaissance aircraft appeared over a ridge, fleeting shadows that required immediate reaction. Squadron leader Thompson gave orders for split maneuvers. Some pilots maintained strafing runs while others adjusted altitude and heading to intercept or evade. Each decision was measured against both tactical advantage and mechanical tolerance. Amid the stress, human cost surfaced. Sergeant Allen, responsible for checking engine bearings mid-flight, noted abnormal vibration in a bomber's right propeller. He manually adjusted pitch mid-strike, a risky move under heavy flak. Engineers later logged the intervention. Bearing 3B temporarily misaligned. Adjustment prevented failure. Immediate post-sortie replacement required. The action likely saved both aircraft and ground targets below. Letters written mid-sortie captured the psychological weight. One pilot, scribbling quickly on scraps of paper while the aircraft banked, wrote, "To my wife, if I do not return, know that every second counted, every decision deliberate." The smallest part may save or destroy lives. These ephemeral records illustrate the human dimension of technical warfare courage intertwined with mechanical precision. The motif of small components controlling vast outcomes repeated relentlessly. A single bearing's subtle vibrations misread gauges. Each could alter trajectory, disrupt formation, or compromise bombing accuracy. Pilots became acutely aware that skill and training could only mitigate, not eliminate, the inherent risk. Logs from multiple aircraft document minor deviations, emergency corrections, and split-second choices that collectively determined mission success. By late afternoon, the battle over the depot reached its climax. Bombers delivered ordnance with precision strafing runs, disrupted enemy logistics, and fighters defended the formation from sporadic interception. However, 3 aircraft reported bearing-related anomalies requiring emergency landings. Repairs were logged immediately: hydraulic adjustments, propeller shaft replacements, and recalibrated instruments. One log entry reads, "Aircraft 12 bearing 3B replaced. Flight controls verified. Crew fatigue noted. Mission debrief pending." The human toll was evident. Injuries from debris, minor burns, and temporary concussions occurred, yet training and discipline prevented catastrophic loss. One squadron officer reflected, "Every minor injury, every scar, every adjustment documented." The mission succeeds only because human and mechanical elements act in concert. By dusk, the strike had achieved its tactical objectives. Supply depots, damaged enemy columns, disrupted, and ground forces temporarily hindered. Aircraft returned to base with fuel margins as low as 5 gallons, engines bearing the strain of prolonged high-throttle maneuvers. Engineers immediately began inspections and maintenance. Bearings, the tiny yet critical components, were checked meticulously, the small pivot that had determined the success of an entire mission. Combat Phase 2 concluded with a dual lesson: the visible destroyed enemy targets, effective air support for ground units, and the invisible, the human effort, vigilance, and mechanical reliability required to achieve those outcomes. Logs, diaries, and repair entries from the sortie preserve this narrative for future training and archival study. Combat Phase 2 summary: aircraft affected by bearing or mechanical issues. Casualties, minor injuries, 6, 1 scar documented. Fuel remaining post-sortie, 5 to 10 gallons per aircraft. Ordnance delivered due bombs, 320 rounds of ammunition. Bearings replaced or adjusted mid-sortie, 2-3 instances. The operation underscored a recurring theme: precision in preparation and split-second decision-making can determine the outcome of a complex, high-risk mission. Tiny mechanical elements, human judgment, and coordination between crews intertwined to shape the air war and influence ground operations below. The bearing had changed everything, a quiet pivot that dictated chaos and victory alike. And in the logs, letters, and scars, the story endured. March 4-5, 1943, Eastern Front airfields, post-mission assessment. By the early hours of March 4th, the airstrip was quiet, save for the hum of engines winding down and the murmur of ground crews performing inspections. Aircraft returned from sorties marked by fatigue, minor mechanical strain, and the visible toll of continuous engagement. Engineers immediately began cataloging each component stressed or damaged, particularly the tiny bearings whose failure or precise function had determined the success of the previous day's mission. Logs recorded meticulous details. Aircraft affected by bearing anomalies, 3. Casualties, minor injuries, 1 documented scar. Fuel reserves at landing, 5 to 10 gallons remaining per aircraft. Ordnance expended 12 bombs, 320 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. Bearings replaced or adjusted 2-3 instances. Each number conveyed a broader lesson: The operation had been technically successful. Enemy supply depots, damaged ground units, delayed, and tactical objectives met. Yet it also revealed the fragile margin of error. A misaligned bearing, a split-second hesitation by a pilot, or a delayed radio call could have cascaded into catastrophic failure. Repairs began immediately. Engineers worked to replace stressed bearings, recalibrate control surfaces, and ensure that engines operated within safe tolerances. Fuel systems were inspected and throttle linkages tested. On one fighter, a bearing showing early fatigue required replacement, a process logged as bearing 3B replaced. Full system check completed. Ready for next sortie. These records, precise and unembellished, formed the archival foundation for training and future operations. Leadership lessons were clear. Commanders reviewed the sequence of decisions when pilots elected to continue strafing despite mechanical warning, when wingmen adjusted formation to compensate, when engineers improvised mid-flight corrections. Officers emphasized that preparation discipline and coordination had preserved both aircraft and ground objectives. The reports underscored that leadership was not only about issuing orders, but fostering trust among crews and enabling autonomous decision-making under duress. Luck, too, played a role. Torpedoes missed by mere meters, bearing anomalies, did not result in engine failure, and sudden gusts did not force collisions. Logs and after-action reports acknowledged this. Human skill and preparation mitigated, but could not eliminate the influence of chance. One entry states, "Even the best training cannot substitute for fortune. It can only prepare men to survive when fortune wavers." Crew trust proved decisive. Pilots relied on navigators, gunners, and wingmen. Engineers on technicians and flight engineers. Ground crews on pilots, returning with real-time feedback. This network of interdependence allowed rapid adaptation to unexpected variables, maintaining operational cohesion despite mechanical stress, environmental conditions, and enemy resistance. By mid-morning, a consolidated report summarized the outcome. The Allied air operation had achieved its objectives, preserved most aircraft, and sustained minimal casualties, but it highlighted critical vulnerabilities. Even minor mechanical failures, the tiniest bearing, could have compromised an entire sortie. Leadership, preparation skill, and timing had prevented disaster, demonstrating the balance between human agency and mechanical reliability in war. Reflections in logbooks and diaries illustrate the human dimension. A pilot wrote, "We returned with engines strained and hearts pounding. Every moment depended on each man, each machine. Success was fragile, held together by discipline and a thread of fortune." Engineers documented bearings inspected and replaced, the precise rotations and torque applied, and notes on crew performance. These entries, factual and detailed, preserve the story not as legend, but as evidence of meticulous coordination. The day's engagement revealed that preparation alone could not guarantee outcomes. Rapid decision-making, adaptation, and resilience under pressure were equally critical. The balance of skill versus luck was evident. Crews trained extensively to anticipate failures, yet could not predict every variable. One officer summarized, "In combat, we manage what we can control and mitigate what we cannot. Every component, every decision matters." Thesis resolved in one line. Even the smallest element, a tiny bearing combined with human skill, discipline, and trust, can determine the outcome of complex operations, showing that precision and preparation matter as much as strategy beyond the battlefield. Post-war reflection, doctrine, training, and modern lessons. After the war, the engagement over the Eastern Front in March 1943 became a case study in both Allied archives and training manuals. While the immediate battle had been tactical, the lessons endured far beyond that day. The mission illustrated how small mechanical components, a single bearing, a minor adjustment, could influence the effectiveness of air operations and the impact of ground support. The meticulous logs, letters, and repair records preserved the evidence that precise maintenance, disciplined crews, and split-second decision-making were decisive factors. Allied air forces incorporated these lessons into post-war doctrine. Training emphasized technical familiarization with aircraft systems, detailed pre-flight inspections, and emergency procedures. Commanders stressed trust and coordination among pilots, navigators, gunners, and engineers, recognizing that even experienced crews faced limits imposed by mechanical or environmental factors. Fuel management timing and redundancy in checks became cornerstones of air strategy. Manuals cited this operation as a clear example. Operational success depends as much on micromechanical reliability as on tactics or numerical superiority. The engagement also reinforced the principle that human judgment is indispensable. Machines could fail bearings, could wear instruments, could mislead. But a disciplined crew could detect, adapt, and correct issues before disaster struck. This understanding shaped subsequent air campaigns, emphasizing the integration of engineering knowledge observation and leadership into tactical planning. Beyond doctrine, the story influenced cultural memory and military pedagogy. Archival documents, diaries, and letters became central to training programs, reminding generations of aviators that even minor oversights carry significant consequences. The narrative shifted the perception of warfare from sheer firepower to a synthesis of precision, human skill, and attention to detail. In classrooms, instructors often pointed to this mission as an example of how the smallest component can alter the largest operation. Modern air strategy continues to draw from these insights. Maintenance protocols, pre-flight checks, and decision-making hierarchies in both NATO and Allied air forces incorporate redundancy and micro-level monitoring. Lessons about risk assessment, crew trust, and mechanical reliability are directly traceable to engagements such as this one, where a tiny bearing dictated operational success. The archival records also emphasize evidence over myth. While the mission could be dramatized as a story of miraculous skill or heroic improvisation, the preserved logs show measured, methodical human responses to mechanical uncertainty and environmental challenges. Letters, diaries, and repair entries record decisions, errors, and corrections in real time, providing an unvarnished understanding of both success and vulnerability. Ultimately, this mission demonstrates why micro-level attention and disciplined teamwork matter as much as large-scale strategy. It is a reminder that preparation, precision, and coordinated action remain relevant in modern warfare. Human skill and mechanical reliability working together under pressure continue to define outcomes across air and ground operations. Call to action. Subscribe for archival-based stories where history is preserved through evidence, not embellishment. Witness the lessons, understand the precision required, and remember the impact of the smallest details in the sweep of history.